Hey everyone, it's Heidi from My Reading Life, here today to film my favorite nonfiction reads of 2019. These books I've talked about before on my channel, so I won't be talking about them in great detail, and they're in no particular order, but these are the top 10 nonfiction books that I read in the past year, and no end of the year time period would be complete without a bunch of these lists coming out, right? And I love watching them on other people's channels, so I figured I'd put out my own. So these, like I said, are in no particular order, just the favorite nonfiction that I read in the last year. The very first one is a book that I consumed on audiobook, and that's Becoming by Michelle Obama. You guys have heard me go on and on about this book ad nauseum. I will just say it is so delightful to listen to on audio. Michelle Obama reads it herself. It is lovely. And lest you think this is just her love fest to her husband, it is not. It is about her life. It's about her growing up and going to school and what she wanted out of her life, and then she meets this man and falls in love, and how that changes her life and what her experience was like being married to the president. She has a very clear-eyed view of Barack Obama, and it is absolutely delightful to listen to her talk about him. The second book that I absolutely love this year is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. This is a book in which Rebecca Skloot researched this woman's life, Henrietta Lacks. Henrietta Lacks was a woman in the black woman who had cervical cancer in the 50s, and doctors took her cervical cells without her knowledge or permission and used them to create what's known as the HeLa cell, which is used even today in medical research. And this is all about Rebecca Skloot going back to find out about Henrietta Lacks' life, her family, and what happened to her family after her death from cancer, in which they knew nothing about these cells' existence until much later, and how this all plays out with the background of civil rights and how Black Americans have been treated throughout history. Excellent book. This is a book that's interesting because I tried to read it a few years ago and got to like page 75 or 100 and just put it down for whatever reason. And then when I picked it up this time, I just could not stop reading it. It's so engaging and informative and fascinating. So it just goes to show you that sometimes it's not the book, it's just the time that you're reading it. And you should sometimes go back to some books. The next one I want to shout out in this top 10 list is Thick by Tressie McMillan Cottom. This is a collection of essays. Cottom is an academic. She's a sociologist, and so she brings together her academic research into sociology with pop culture and American sort of cultural issues having to do with racism and sexism and academic issues of being an academic. So I found her voice to be highly entertaining. Again, I listened to this one on audio. Cottom is an excellent narrator of her own work. She has a very she puts the inflection where it needs to be in her essays. She writes with a lot of humor and wit and I don't want to say sarcasm, but she has a biting wit at times, and I found it just amazing and just truly insightful and made me think about things that I hadn't thought about before. So if you like people like Roxane Gay's essay writing, definitely try Tressie McMillan Cottom's Thick. It is brilliant. The next one I want to talk about is Complications. Sorry, this is a white cover, so it's sort of washing out. But this is Complications, A Surgeon's Notes on an Imperfect Science by Atul Gawande. You guys know how much I love Atul Gawande. Being Mortal has been on an annual top 10 list for me in the past. He is an excellent writer of medical nonfiction. In this book, he brings us into his experiences learning how to be a surgeon and how that happens and what it's like to go in to do a procedure for the first time, even though you theoretically in your mind, academically, know how to do something, but it's a lot different when you have to actually physically do it to a live person. And the only way to get better at something is to actually continue to do it and to practice. And he talks about that a lot in this book. This is just another example of how well Atul Gawande writes about these kinds of issues. He writes with a lot of heart and a lot of empathy, and I just love how he writes about stuff. So I have a feeling that I am going to read everything that this man has written. I think there's only a few more things that I haven't yet gotten to. So if you like nonfiction about medical issues, if you like essays, Atul Gawande is a winner. The next book I want to talk about is a book that I read on ebook, so I don't have it in physical edition, and it is a short, basically one essay that was published individually, and it's Guns by Stephen King. Everybody knows Stephen King as a very prolific writer of horror and suspense, but I also really love Stephen King's nonfiction writing. His book On Writing, which is about his writing process and sort of a writing memoir type of a book, is well known and well beloved. This one essay on guns he wrote quite a while ago. It's not recent at all. I just happened to come across it somehow. I don't even remember how, and read it basically in one gulp. And it's really, really excellent. It's an essay that he wrote after one of his stories was implicated in a school shooting, as the shooters, one of the shooters, what's the word I want? The shooter had referenced one of Stephen King's short stories as a something that had influenced him. And this was Stephen King's reaction, this essay, in talking about gun violence and how cultural things like books and movies and TV and music do or do not influence people who commit acts of violence. And I just thought it was brilliant. And really another aspect of gun violence in our culture, and it really gave me a lot to think about. So I would definitely recommend that if you haven't already read it. The next book I want to discuss is Voices from Chernobyl by Svetlana Alexievich. I have talked about this book a lot this year. This is an oral history of a nuclear disaster. Alexievich went into the community and the people who were impacted by the meltdown of the Chernobyl nuclear reactor, the people who lived in the village surrounding this area, the government employees that were sent to deal with it, the military personnel who were sent to deal with it, the people who actually worked at the nuclear reactor at the time, and interviews them, and then put them together in a book and took out her questions. So all you get are the voices of the people who were interviewed. It is just so powerful. And so informative and so well done. I really felt like I got to know this issue and these people so much better. I just loved it. I think if you like history nonfiction, if you like history fiction that's written from a very personal point of view, I think this book would be right up your alley. This was simply superb, and I look forward to reading more by Svetlana Alexievich in the future. I read this next book as a buddy read in September. This is The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. This is a history of the Great Migration in America, where Black Americans left the southern part of the U.S. and migrated to the north and west parts of the U.S. looking for a better life, looking for jobs, education, more equal treatment, all of those things, just all around better situation than what they had in the South. And you can see my tabs are still in there. This book was wonderful. It was an excellent book to buddy read. I read it with a group of women, and we just had a fabulous time discussing this book. And also, I think the size of this book could be very intimidating, but Wilkerson writes it in such a personal way. She follows 3 individuals over the course of their lifetime, and tells their stories, and in doing so interweaves the history of this period in America between the late 1800s and the 1970s, when Black Americans were, so-called free and emancipated after the Civil War, but were being held down by Jim Crow law and racism and just violence from lynching and all of that sort of thing. And Wilkerson tells the stories of these individuals so well. We really get to know them, and see what this world looked like from their eyes, and what was good and what was bad about migrating from the South to the North, because it wasn't all, once they got to the North or the West, it wasn't all roses. I can tell you that. So definitely don't be intimidated by the size of this book. It reads really quickly. It reads very much in places like fiction because of the way that Wilkerson structures the narrative. So it's an excellent way to dive into nonfiction if nonfiction is something that intimidates you. The next book might be one of my favorites of the year. I didn't rank these, but I read The Great Influenza, the epic story of the deadliest plague in history by John M. Barry in December, and I just wanted to gulp it down. It was a nonfiction book that I did not want to put down. Normally I read nonfiction at night before I go to bed because I find it easy to read a chapter and then set it down and go to sleep. But with this book, I never wanted to set it down. It just consumed me. I wanted to know more about this. I did not know very much about this time period, which was the 1917, 1918 during the influenza epidemic, which killed millions of people worldwide and started in the army camps after the draft was enacted for World War I. And not only is the medical history, which is outlined in this book, fascinating, the history around how the U.S. got into World War I, the mistakes that were made by the government in protecting the public health, the mistakes that were made by the military in protecting the health of their the soldiers and sailors under their commands. Just so much interesting history, so much infuriating history. It makes me want to read more about World War I, and I do plan to, in 2020, read more about World War I because of this book. And I generally avoid things having to do with the wars, but this book just fascinated me so much. I need to read more about it. The ninth book that I want to discuss on my top nonfiction list is Underland by Robert McFarlane. This is a book I borrowed from the library earlier this year. It is a science nonfiction. It is a collection of each chapter is about a different aspect of life underground, and whether that is how roots and trees and plants interact with each other under the forest floor, to how humans utilize the underland, whether it be through mining or caving or things of that nature. McFarlane touches on all life under the earth, and he writes in such a gorgeous way. His prose is amazing. So beautiful. So it's almost like reading poetry in nonfiction form. It is absolutely gorgeous and so fascinating. All of these things, I knew a little bit about some of the topics, and then I knew pretty much nothing about a lot of the other topics, and I just found the whole thing fascinating. There was a chapter on where the author goes, he goes to Norway or Sweden, one of the northern European countries, and goes way to the north of the country and then hikes out into the wilderness, into basically the mountains. It's in the middle of the winter, and he goes to this one particular place along the coast where there's ice caves, and inside the ice caves are pictographs that were put there, thousands of years ago by prehistoric peoples. And that chapter was just so stunningly gorgeous. I just couldn't believe the beauty of the writing, intertwined with the fascinating subjects that he was discussing. Very much reminiscent of one of my favorite science nonfiction writers, David George Haskell. So definitely, if you're into that kind of science nonfiction, I would pick up Underland by Robert McFarlane. And then last but not least is the very last book that I read in 2019. Amazing nonfiction. This is a graphic memoir, graphic nonfiction, done in a very interesting and unique way. This is Good Talk by Mira Jacobs, a memoir and conversations. Mira Jacobs is a brown woman married to a white man who is Jewish. They have a little boy, and the little boy starts asking questions about why people treat him different because of the color of his skin. And then these are the conversations that she has both with her son, with her husband, with her friends, all around topics of race, immigration, politics, how we deal with each other as humans. It is beautiful. It is stunning. It made me cry in several places. It made me laugh. Once I sat down and started reading this, I could not stop. I just blew through the whole thing in one day. There is a chapter in here from when Mira Jacobs was a young girl in elementary school. She writes an essay and wins the Daughters of the American Revolution essay competition, and her teacher takes her to accept the award. I sobbed reading that story, and then I had to read it out loud to my husband, in which I cried again reading it to him. It is so powerful. It is so powerful. And that's what I would say about this book in general. It is so powerful. It is such an amazing take on where we are in this moment in our culture and what people have to deal with. I loved it. You should read it if you have not read it. So that's it. That's my top nonfiction reads for 2019. I would encourage you all to read all 10 of those if you haven't read them yet. I absolutely love them, and I am looking forward to reading many more great nonfiction titles in 2020 and sharing them with you. I hope you're all doing well, and I'll talk to you later.